Welcome to Global BC Presents. I'm Sophie Lui. It's been more than 7 years since the toxic drug public health emergency was declared in BC. And in that time, thousands of people have died. Tara McGuire, a longtime radio host turned writer, lost her 21-year-old son Holden just before the crisis became official. In her book, Holden, After and Before, Tara tries to piece together how and why it happened. I just want to start with hearing more about Holden and what he was like and your relationship with him. So who was your son?
He was a beautiful person. You know, he was just so much fun, very creative. That was quite apparent all the way through his life. Super creative kid, musical, like could just play music and was really interested in music, but he would never do anything formally, you know, like he would never make it official. He was just really good at a lot of things, a great reader, super irreverent and funny. He had a lot of friends. He was a good friend, a really good brother, and it's so much fun to be around, like really irreverent and unconventional person. He'd always like he'd always put a soundtrack to everything and just, you know, challenge you in interesting ways. He was a smart person.
I like that you say challenge you in interesting ways. Was it frustrating too?
Well, like after he took philosophy in high school, you know. But he just saw the world in an unconventional way, and it was always interesting to be around him. He was not a follower. Mm-hmm. You know, he was just super interesting, and he liked to question things.
Did he surprise you with that? Like that creativity and the questioning and the intellectual ability that he showed?
I think it did come as a surprise, and I think it also at times was not a problem, but it created a bit of conflict, you know, because I would be like, can you please just do what everyone else is doing? It'll be so much easier. Yeah. But he just couldn't, you know. He just was a person who didn't want to. I remember him in like preschool, all the kids are holding onto the rope to cross the street, and he's like, I don't need a rope, I'm good. You know, just things like that, like not super disrespectful and not harmful in any way, but just saw that he wanted to live differently.
So when did you first start to see Holden's creativity and artistic ability coming out?
Pretty early. He did a lot of, I mean, most kids do a lot of artwork, but it was stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of just all different irreverent kinds of artwork. And he would do little comics and make up his own characters and paintings, drawings. He was always sketching, always doodling. And then I think around grade 6 or 7, he started to get into hip hop music and graffiti. And then they would have, you know, these books where they would practice all their doodles and all their graffiti and little tags and make up names for themselves. And then, of course, you know, on a few fences and garages and stuff around town, around the neighborhood.
He was a deep, deep thinker, like a deep kid.
Yeah.
Even from a young age.
Yeah, he was. I mean, we would read the same books when he was in elementary school and I was an adult, and we would read them and talk about them. And yeah, he was a really deep thinker, and at the same time super immature and goofy and off. I mean, he was a dude. Yeah. So, you know, it was complex.
Yeah. And what was your relationship like with him as he matured?
Yeah, I mean, great, but it was hard as a teenager. His dad and I were apart, so he would go back and forth. But Holden was always a very respectful person. Even when we would disagree, he would, you know, if he flew off the handle or whatever, he would always apologize later. Like, he really valued our relationship, and we were close, even though we were physically far apart, because at the end of his life, we went off traveling. My husband Cam and our daughter Lila and I were away. I would say we were geographically far apart, but still very, very close, you know, emotionally.
And did you know at that time that he was using drugs?
I knew he was smoking pot. I knew he was drinking a lot of alcohol. I didn't really, I mean, I assumed some party drugs here and there, and we talked about it, but I didn't know the extent. No, I didn't know.
Until
he was gone. Yeah, I didn't know. Not at all. I was very surprised. And part of what if you don't, I mean, if you know that someone is in substance use disorder, I'm assuming that you would live with that fear all the time, especially now. But I'm going to say there was an intuitive feeling that something wasn't right, and I couldn't zero in on it, and I didn't know what it was, and Holden was very reluctant to talk about it while we were away, and we didn't communicate a lot in that last bit of his life. But then when I did see him in person, you know, very warm, very healthy looking, very, you know, lots of eye contact, like he was there and he was healthy. And so it's just, it's a shock that it happens, but it's also a shock to know that your child is even in that environment at all.
When the police officer came to your house and told you that he died and told you that it was a suspected overdose, did you believe it?
The police officer wouldn't say how he died.
Okay.
They just said, we don't know. But of course, that's what comes to mind. You know, no sign of foul play, no paraphernalia at the scene. They did tell us that, no drug paraphernalia at the scene. He was with a friend, and he was with the coroner. And the coroner at that time was so busy that it took a long time to get results. This was in 2015, and the overdose crisis hadn't even been established as a public health emergency, but it was absolutely an emergency. In fact, Holden's body was taken to Burnaby because the morgue at all of the Vancouver morgues were full, to give you some indication. And so initial toxicology told us that that was probably an overdose, but that took quite a while. And then I spoke with the coroner probably 3 months later to confirm what had happened, and that there was alcohol and heroin and other street drugs in his system.
So 3 months after he died, I mean, that did that send you into shock all over again? Or were you still in shock?
I mean, the shock lasted for a very, very long time, but it was a confirmation. I mean, I had to address my own shame, because when you hear that your child has died of an overdose, it does something to you as well. You know, we've come a long way since then, I'd like to say, but I didn't want anyone to know either. I didn't want his sister to know. You know, I didn't want people to know, because I didn't really understand myself, and it took me a long time to figure out that way of thinking may have prevented Holden and maybe others from seeking the help that they want, because it's considered if he had got hit by a car and died, I wouldn't have been the least bit embarrassed. I would have been heartbroken, but I wouldn't have been embarrassed. And when your son dies of an overdose, there's a certain amount of shame that comes into it, and it's taken me a long time to let that go.
So at what point did you decide or allow yourself to try to let go of that shame and write about him and write about what had happened?
I started writing poems initially, very bad poems, but that's kind of how it came out. And I just, clearly I was processing, you know, and I also had a sense that I wanted to document how I was feeling, because I felt like it was fleeting. And so it was private writing at first. And, but then I kind of started to realize this paradigm where if I couldn't talk about it publicly, what did that say? And so I had to decide that it was worthwhile to tell the story, because I was seeing so many people dying, and nobody was really talking about how it felt. They were talking about it in terms of the impact in society and the grief and all of that, but really not specifically how it felt. So I don't know, I just felt that there was hopefully some value there. I don't want Holden's life to be closed and over. I want his life to integrate with my life in a way that I can still live and experience joy, and I couldn't for a very long time.
The book it's beautiful. It's a beautifully written book. It's and it's also very, to me, unusual in that it is part of it is based on, well, it is real events, It is your memory of how things unfolded, but part of it is also sort of fictional in that you imagined certain events in Holden's life that you were not present for, and you sort of put yourself in his mind. So just tell me a little bit about that process, putting yourself in the mind and soul of your son who's gone, and what that felt like for you.
Yeah, thank you.
How do you do that?
I know it's an unconventional structure for sure, and it was challenging to write. Excuse me. I got a lot of help with it. I went to UBC, to the School of Creative Writing, and I got a lot of help from mentors there who helped me articulate that kind of structure, because I was very worried, like, how can I write about things when I wasn't there? And there's this thing called autofiction where, you know, there's a lot of books now where real people are in books doing things they never did, based on imagination. And so what I tried to do was write from a place of evidence. So, you know, I come from a journalism background, and so I would write from a photograph or a conversation that we had, or maybe an email or a text message or whatever. And then, or something that someone had told me. I interviewed a lot of Holden's friends, and they took me all around the city. I mean, they're incredible, Holden's friends. They were so helpful in helping me to understand who he was and kind of more of what happened, because they wanted to know too. You know, they miss him too. And so I took those pieces of evidence, and then I wrote fiction. Those scenes are fiction. They are made up.
But, you know, just sort of going back to being in Holden's head and imagining those things.
Yeah.
Imagining how he felt in those moments.
It's kind of weird, because I would sit at my desk and I would be like, all right, what was it like the first time you did heroin? I don't know. I'm speaking to Holden in my mind. Yeah. And then I'm just kind of just writing, like, I don't know how it happened. Someone had told me that they thought it was an accident, that they thought he thought he was doing coke, which was very prevalent among his friend group at the time. In the graffiti world, and in just his friend, the musician world. And so that was the picture that I had. And so I was like, okay, well, how could this have happened? Like, what do you think? And then I would sit and write a scene and go back to it later and read it with, I'm not going to say no memory of having written it, but it was like, whoa. Like, I feel like he kind of helped me write it, to try and get into his mindset. I was kind of worried about this appropriation question of talking in his voice, but I felt like I got better and better at it as I did it, and I felt like those transitions were more smooth, and it helped me to be more empathetic to his experience and what it might have felt like to be a 21-year-old man living in the city, like trying to make it, trying to have fun. All of your friends are finishing university and you kind of feel like you missed the boat. Like, all of the factors that were parts of his life, I just tried to sit with and understand what they might have felt like.
Was it like a healing journey for you to write? It sounds so cliche, but was it like healing in a way to write this?
No. It was really hard. Yeah. At the same time that I was learning about writing, I was learning about grief. And I got to speak to a lot of experts who were, like, when my book came out, interviewing me about it. And I learned a lot about grief and how, to me, the way I think about it now is there's never closure. I don't want closure. That's a flawed belief and a flawed system. I don't want Holden's life to be closed and over. I want his life to integrate with my life in a way that I can still live and experience joy, and I couldn't for a very long time. And I want to have a full life, but I want him right beside me all the time. And in some ways, hopefully in doing this, I've sort of kept him alive in some ways, because I wrote him in present tense, and I wrote him with a lot of slang, and I wrote him in a lot of his own words from his own text messages, and I want him to be, I want to witness his life. So healing, no. But did I learn a lot about grief, and have I been able to contextualize it in a way that I can manage it? Yes. Yeah. I'm still very sad some days, but most days I feel like it's offered a richness to my life that I wouldn't have had.
I didn't know Holden, but after reading the book, I feel like I knew him. Like, I feel he's real to me.
Is he? And what do you think about him?
He seems like he'd be so much fun to just chat with.
Yeah.
Like, he just sounds so smart and so curious, and like just a lot of thoughts that I would want to I would want to hear his thoughts.
Yeah, thanks.
Like,
That's
for such a young kid, so smart.
Yeah, and you know, like that's who we're losing. Yeah. That's who we're losing, in my opinion. The creative, the bright, the very sensitive people who've had some things go on in their lives and they're in pain. That's how people get into substance use disorder. These are our brightest and most sensitive and creative people. So I wanted to also, like, I wanted to describe Holden, but in a larger sense, I wanted to describe the incredible loss that's happening with the overdose crisis. These are some of our best people. When you go through a great loss, you understand the value of your life, and I treasure my friends. You know, I treasure my experiences where I may have taken them more lightly before, and I think that's what his presence means.
Before your son died, what was your perspective on illicit drugs? And I mean, as you said, the public health emergency hadn't been declared at that time, but we knew something was going on. Yeah. So what was your perspective before Holden died?
I didn't know very much about it. I was super naive. I thought that was like other people. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I didn't care that much about it. Mm-hmm. And now I just see how it's everyone, it's all of us. And I see still how it gets overlooked. And you know, it's not receiving the resources that it needs. People need care. People need mental health care. People need homes. It's a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, so it's been more than 7 years since the public health emergency was declared.
Yeah.
I know you're not an expert, but you have a perspective that most of us don't have. Mm. What do you think we're missing? What are the parts? We're throwing things at this crisis.
Yeah, there are a lot of very qualified people working in this area. So I will say, as a mother, if you could like reverse engineer it and prevent any of those deaths from happening by offering someone a clean supply of the drug that they were going to take anyway, I would take that option. Do I want young kids to have access to drugs? Of course not, absolutely not. But I think by offering people who are entrenched in drug use, and Holden really wasn't, Safe Supply wouldn't have helped him, but the way I look at the crisis now, offering Safe Supply is a way to connect people with the services that they need. And addiction and substance use disorder are so slippery and so multifaceted and so complex that we don't know when a person is ready. It takes many, many tries to extricate yourself from all the aspects of that life. But we need to have treatment ready, we need to have practitioners ready, we need to train more practitioners. Mm-hmm. We need to approach this as a health crisis, and we need to get people housed. When people are suffering and they have to sleep outside, you know, they're going to do things to help eliminate that pain. Yeah. So if we can work on a humanitarian level with giving people houses, giving people medical care, and offering mental health services, that'll help a lot.
It feels like you've been thrust into this world. I mean, your son dies. That in itself is enough trauma for you to take on. But then you're thrust into this world where you're not an expert. Yeah. And there is so much tragedy in this world. And, you know, you now have to carry that burden of being a mother of a son who died of an overdose, and people probably want to talk. Well, I want to talk to you about it.
Yeah, a lot of people want to talk to me about it.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to talk about it. I've learned that I need boundaries. Like it takes me a while to recover. I've been doing some guest speaking and keynotes and stuff, and it does take a while to recover because it's a lot of emotional energy. Mm-hmm. But if it helps, then I'm happy to do it. I think it's important work. I want to be able to do this work, and I want to be able to connect with people who may not have a voice or may not have friends like you who are willing to talk about it. And I guess I just want to open the dialogue about it so that if there's a kid that's maybe struggling, or if you see your friends struggling, you have a bit of language to talk to them about it and help access those. I've been with several people who've said, okay, I'm ready, I will stop. Where are the services? It's almost impossible. It's almost impossible.
So do you have young people Holden's age coming to you, talking to you about their own problems?
I do occasionally.
And what do you tell them?
And I, try and help refer them to services, or I thank them for being open with me and ask them what they feel would be most helpful for them at the time. And I think that's one of the mistakes I made with Holden, is that I was trying to tell him what to do instead of asking him what to do. Yeah. That's a really important piece.
What about parents? Parents of other children who are in the same position, and now, because you've been public about your own loss, I'm sure they're coming to you and asking you for advice, or just, this is what's happening to my family.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest group of people who talk to me, parents of kids, or parents of older children, or spouses of people who are in substance use disorder. And I'm super reluctant to give parenting advice because I feel like I didn't do a good job of it at the time. But I'll say that my relationship with our daughter Lila is way different. It's way more open, way more accepting, way more inquisitive. Kids are going to do what they're going to do, and they make mistakes. And I feel like I made a lot of mistakes. But I think if we understand that we are all in this together, and life is really hard now. It is harder, I think, than when we were kids. And so if we can approach it in a more forgiving and compassionate way, and what I say to parents who've asked me is just stay with them, stay close. Like, that's the most important thing, is keep that relationship close, and try and just bring the volume down a little, and just, it's a long haul, there's nothing overnight. So just try and ask questions, try and get to the underlying trauma if you can, try and get some kind of counseling or therapy or whatever the person feels they need at the time that will help them ease that pain that's bringing them to the substances for relief.
Do you, you say you have Holden with you all the time now. I sort of feel like that with people, loved ones of mine who passed, that they're gone, but now they're almost with me more than they were in life. Do you talk to him?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I do. I talk to him all the time. And I won't say he talks back. Sometimes I'm lucky enough to have a dream with him and I get to give him a hug. But what I think he does is he helps me, he supports me. And at times when I'm speaking to a group or something and I might break down, I kind of feel this it's okay, just a little calmness come over me. And I think, I don't know if you feel this, when you go through a great loss, you understand the value of your life. And I treasure my friends. I treasure my experiences where I may have taken them more lightly before. And I think that's what his presence means. Mm-hmm. His absence is his presence, in a way, in that I realize how easily things can be lost, and I don't take them for granted.
That's lovely. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you.